everyone, and it's another week. That means another episode of UCF Business Talk Live. I am Roger Phipps, COO and co-founder for Seven Lights Marketing Agency, Bird Eye View Inc., Boss Leadership Solutions, and a whole bunch of other businesses that are coming your way. I can't wait to talk about those. And remember, I'm your consultant for everything business, leadership, ops, and tech. Super excited. We are in episode number 13. It's crazy to think about. That's gone by super, super quick. That means you've got at least 13 hours of nonsense and great advice to listen to, depending on when you're talking about. So I'm going to bring in Alan Levin to the show. Alan, let me go ahead and bring you into the stream. What's up, Alan? Looking dapper this week with the jacket.
Hey, Roger. How's it going? Happy to be here.
Good. Yeah, we both kind of dressed for the occasion. I have my button up instead of my normal t-shirt, and you upgraded to the sport coat. So super excited.
Absolutely.
Unfortunately, this week we won't have Rob Powers, and unfortunately, Josh Lazar has got daddy duty. So I won't give him too much of a hard time for that. He couldn't make it for this show, but he did make it last week in spite of being on the road in a car without air conditioning and suffering from meat sweats. So, I won't give him too hard of a time for that. So this week, we're talking about something near and dear to my heart, and it's at the heart of any type of business relationship that you have, both internally and externally, and that's communication. I've done podcasts, I've done radio shows. Alan does a podcast. So we communicate that way. And it's great because you get to have fun and you talk about a topic, but you don't have anybody talking back to you, right? And when you're in business, I'll just remind everybody of my 3 rules of business. People do business with people they like. That's number 1. And if you don't communicate appropriately, people won't like you. And I will share an example of that later on. Both parties have to get something out of it. And there has to be equity in the relationship. And all of that requires communication for your clients and for other people that are associated with it. So without further ado, let's talk a little bit about email and how to use it. Email is a very important facet of our everyday lives. Depending on which email box I'm looking at any given moment, I've either got 16,000 or 30. Emails in them, but they're all important things and people, that are trying to communicate with me. So in the business world, we use email for a lot of things. We use it for internal communication when we're talking to our teams, trying to share, give direction on things that we need to do, asking questions for follow-up, communicating with vendors, right? A lot of times you're talking to different vendors that you're dealing with and you need help with something. And you're also talking with clients. And, there's ways to do that that make things more efficient. And there's some do's and don'ts that go along with email. So I'm going to give you my first rule of email. And Alan, I'd love to get your take on this. My first rule of email is if an email requires more than 5 lines to communicate something, so 5 sentences, don't send the email. Pick up the phone or do a video call. And the reason I say that is if you've got more than 5 lines in there, essentially it's going to draw a conversation, right? And that conversation, instead of people emailing back and forth or potentially trying to read between the lines, that draws out that conversation a lot longer than if you just had a conversation with the individual that you're working with. So, Alan, what do you think about that? What are your thoughts on email?
Yeah, I think, sometimes I think we tend, unless you're just a naturally outgoing, talkative person, you kind of you avoid having that phone call, right? That hard call, whether it's with an employee or a client, and you kind of are nervous and you don't want to do that call. So, hey, let me just leave it to an email. But the problem is with that is, like you said, if it's too long, people are going to, what is the saying? TDLR, too long, didn't read, right? Or, like you said, it can get lost in translation. That's a big problem. You can't really tell I think it's harder to digest the context, the tone of voice, and things can really just be misinterpreted in an email or in a text message. Whereas when you say it in person, it can come across a lot more tactfully. And so, yeah, I agree with that. If it's going to be super long or it's something really important and you want someone to hear your tone of voice and kind of hear your emotions and be able to emote, I think it's probably better to go to the phone.
Yeah, and I think that's a topic we'll explore next too. Coming up soon is packaging your message, right? So that speaks to that. 70% of all communication, and this is not a statistic, I'm just pulling out of thin air, is visually done, right, by people reading your body language. So there's the message that you're trying to convey, and there's everything else that's wrapped around that. And we'll talk about that packaging next. But going back to the email standpoint of it, email was never meant to replace a conversation. It was meant for quick notifications, right? You lose the context. If it's a complicated idea, there's going to be questions. You don't have the ability to ask those questions and have those interactions. And you also don't have the ability to make sure that someone actually understood. So when I'm having a conversation like with whether it's with a client or whether it's one of my employees, right? One of the things that I always do, whether I'm getting information from someone else or giving that information, is I always ask them to play back, basically what I said, right? Because I want to understand that they understand what I'm actually asking, because people hear things different ways all the time. So if I'm talking with a client, sometimes if that's in an email, right? If I'm communicating via an email or I'm having a conversation, I'll send a follow-up email that basically outlines to them, okay, next steps. This is, these are next steps for me. These are next steps for you. And this is when we're meeting again, right? That's cool. You absolutely want to do that. But if it's something more complicated or there's nuance involved, if it's just not straight fact that's easily understood, a conversation is required, because people will hear what they hear based on what their mood is at any particular point in time, what their prior experience has been, what their assessment of the situation is that you're talking about. So just sending an email isn't enough. So Alan, have you ever run into like a time where an email has been misunderstood? Like you sent an email, you thought you were pretty clear with what you said, and then either an employee or a client has completely misunderstood it.
Yeah, I've definitely run into that situation with clients where, they're misinterpreting what I said in email, and it could be a couple different reasons. And one is just what I deal with is a lot of technical stuff in nature when it comes to dealing with people's websites in the back end, or even just stuff that I might find basic, like getting administrative privileges for a Facebook page or something like that. But the client isn't as savvy in that department. So when you're telling them all that, they kind of maybe interpret it as, what is this guy talking about? Is he trying to talk over my head? Is it really confusing the person? And, that's where like the tone there could sound like maybe you're, I don't know, barking orders, or you're demanding something, and you're just like trying to, say all this stuff that they don't get. So, for me, a lot of times, like when I have like an onboarding call, I love having it on Zoom. And, in the past, I've tried to say, hey, send me all this information before our call, but they don't understand some of these things. So whether it's you or a project manager kind of going in and, on a Zoom call and showing them these type of things, and that's, Zoom call, it's virtual, but it's still a call where you can, kind of, politely walk them through these things, I think is really key. And then, yeah, internally, same thing. I've run into the situations where my messages have been misinterpreted. Just, even just a couple words can, mix something up, or a misspelling or whatever, not having a comma somewhere, you never know. So I think if it's a really crucial conversation with a client or with an employee that's a time sensitive thing, or there's a sense of urgency, the phone call is going to be a better route.
Yeah, and something you mentioned there that I think is important for people to understand is that most people do not want to look like they know less than they should or
Correct.
less than you expect them to, right? And so it's important in two phases when you're talking about emails, right? All books in the United States are written at an 8th grade level. All speeches that a politician gives are written at an 8th grade level. Now, why is that? Right? There's Brittany. Hey, Brittany. Good to see you. People, especially if they're coming to you because you have an expertise in something that they don't, enough to the point where they're paying you their hard-earned cash to do that, right? So the important thing to remember is, one, avoid industry jargon. All of us are guilty at this at any particular time. We're talking to each other. Like when Alan and I talk about marketing things, right? We're talking about things, we talk about acronyms, we talk about whatever, right? And we understand it at a level that our clients don't. That's why they're coming to us. So don't use industry jargon. Your clients are not going to understand, and they're not going to vocalize that. Now, if you were having a conversation like Alan and I are, right, where I can see Alan's facial expressions and he starts furrowing his brow like, what is this guy talking about? Then I might have that visual cue to come back to that particular topic. You don't have that in an email. Don't make it complicated, and do not use industry jargon when you're doing that. Also, write the messages simply, right? And by simply, it means easy to understand, to the point, as much as possible. Email is meant to be that way. Now, what I will say is that doesn't mean, right? Because to Alan's point earlier, you've got an email, you're sending an email, and it sounds like you're yelling at somebody because you're too curt in the way that you wrote it, right? You want to make sure that you're aware of who your audience is, and that you're aware of who your audience is, and that you are putting some sort of fluff that's appropriate to their personality. I call it fluff at the beginning and at the end. You want it to feel personal. You don't want it to be impersonal, right? It is an impersonal way of doing things, so don't add to that. And I love this. Brittany had a point here that she brought in. Thank you for joining us. And there we go. It was a few clicks too many to get that on there. So there's Brittany, our friend Brittany from the show. From what Josh said, an expert bowler is what we heard. They never want to look like they don't know. Make them feel supported and validated. 100%, right? And I'll show an example of how not to do that a little later. I have a little section called horror stories of what not to say when selling. And I actually knew what I was talking about, but this guy just totally blew it out of the water with that comment. But your clients and your teams are people that rely on you. And if they're relying on you, you want them to be supported and you want them to be validated. So, Alan, have you ever run into a situation like that where you've received an email where it's just so curt or demeaning or meant to make you feel dumb, for lack of a better term?
Well, I think when you brought up don't use industry jargon, that really resonated because that is the absolute truth. People inherently, like, if we're talking like you and me and we're using industry jargon, and that may be a way to show each other that we know what we're talking about, but using industry jargon to a person that's not trained in that area is not impressive. It doesn't impress them at all. There's a concept I read about called the reptilian complex, and it's basically like your mind wants the least path of resistance, wants to understand anything that goes above your head. You kind of start to automatically tune out. So using industry jargon to a prospect is not going to impress them. You want to speak to them on an 8th grade level. I mean, even ChatGPT, you could tell it, make me this essay for on an 8th grade level. And the reason that is there is because people want to understand what you're saying. And it's like Brittany said, you want them to feel validated and they don't want to show they don't know, but using that kind of industry jargon is actually kind of counterintuitive. Because not only they don't understand, it's not going to sit there and impress them. They want it to inherently resonate with them and understand it, make it feel like it's going to be something that's great for them. And, using that is, I think, is actually really counterintuitive. So I've received emails in the past from people that have used terminology and things that I didn't understand. And for me, it's like my brain's going to shut off. I'm not going to sit there and start researching everything that they said. So if anything, I think it's a detractor.
Well, that's funny. My reaction is just the opposite. I'm going to definitely research everything that they just said because I'm upset. I don't know what they're talking about, but that's just me and how my brain works. But most people, they're not going to say anything. They're just going to gloss over it and they're not going to understand. And That leads to miscommunication and expectations that are not met. Right. And so when you're setting an expectation through using that industry jargon and you're telling them what you're doing and what the expectation, what you're giving them, they can't derive value if they don't understand what you're talking about.
Right.
Right. And that's the whole point of being a business, is providing value to your clients. So whether it's in sales, whether it's in consulting, whether it's in anything else, you want to make sure that they're left understanding, so they understand the value that they're providing and you're setting appropriate expectations. Now, we're talking about a lot about what not to do with emails. Let's talk about what to do with emails, right? So one of the things you absolutely want to do, and this is for all you salespeople out there, okay? And you remember, I always say, what's my saying? Everybody in an organization is a salesperson. It doesn't matter what you do, right? So that means internally, you're communicating, you're selling your team constantly, right? Either you're selling them on a concept that you're asking them to do, you're asking them to do something, etc., right? You're selling them internally, you're selling your clients externally, right? So one of the things that's important about the selling process is to reiterate expectations on both, right? So no matter what your email chain is, or whether you're having a communication in a meeting, make sure you're using email to do two things. One, what I like to call double tapping. And anybody who's in sales knows what that means. That means you're calling your client. If you don't get them, you're also sending them an email. So make sure there's a follow-up there, right? Two, if you have a meeting that's about a product, make sure you're setting expectations, right? Three, be clear on what you want them to do. This is a mutual beneficial relationship, right? So not just what their expectations of you are, but also what your expectations of them are. So if you're going through a project and you need, like, for example, when you build a website, Alan was talking about this, right? He had a client, he and I were talking about that. They were waiting for content to put on the actual website. And he was waiting ages and ages and ages and ages. Set time frames, set time, time expectations. Make sure you're setting expectations for your client too, because your client's not going to do anything unless you make them do it. So if you've got a situation where it requires the client to be involved, make sure you're setting expectations, and writing it down and formalizing in an email is a great way to do that, because people will hear whatever they hear during that conversation. By setting that expectation and getting an acknowledgement, it's like a mini contract. And you want to be able to do that so that A, your client understands their responsibilities, and B, if they don't meet those expectations, right, then you've got something to fall back on, right? So, a lot of people record calls for that reason too, but I don't want to pull a call that's way too creepy for most people. They're like, you're recording our calls and you're pulling our calls. It's very standoffish, right? If it's there on the front end, instead of trying to argue the point in the back end, you're avoiding a point of conflict, and you never want a point of conflict with your client if you can avoid it. So it's the one time in your life where avoidance is the right strategy. I know that sounds terrible, but yes, that's 100% true. Okay. The other thing I was going to say with emails is making sure that you are checking up on things, right? Now, you don't want to write an email, even if you're checking on something with your team, that it seems like you're Mr. Taskmaster and you're ordering them to provide a response. You still want that to be friendly, congenial, collegial. which, by the way, UCF football kicks off in 2 weeks. So excited. Sorry, I said collegial. So go Knights. And, have you ever received something like that, Alan? Or have you ever looked back at one of your emails when you're setting expectations for your team and you're like, oh, I wish I wouldn't have said something like that way?
Yeah, I that's something I've had to work on really over the past year, is just the setting the expectations in the emails. I mean, I think, like you said, having everything in writing is so crucial, and setting expectations for, your team and then of the client, but yeah, internally too. Having it, clearly, clear cut in writing. But yeah, there's been things that I've said that I wished I hadn't, and that kind of goes back to our original point, where sometimes the phone is better. Just how things can be misconstrued in email, or maybe the expectations aren't clearly set. I think it's a nice, you need to have a good balance, because you want to have things in writing so you can refer back to it, but you also want to have a conversation about it to make sure that it's understood on all sides. So for me, that I think there's a fine balance there.
Awesome. Yeah. And this topic is super excited. I could talk about emails all day, which is kind of an oxymoron. I'm talking about emails, right? But we're 21 minutes in, and we're going to go ahead and move to the next topic. So the next thing I wanted to talk about is kind of something we started with, which is packaging your message. So, Alan and I and the team, we always talk about a few things. And when I write something on here that people are like, what the heck are you talking about? Alan kind of had a moment where he was like, okay, why don't you explain that and what you mean by that, right? So here's what I mean by packaging your message. One thing that I have learned as a leader for over 25 years, whether it's a client or whether it's an internal communication, people hear or interpret what they hear based on their personal experiences in their life, which are different than yours, right? They have different personalities and they have different experiences. So one of the first things I do whenever I go to a new team is I have them do a Myers-Briggs, right, and a TKI assessment. So for those of you that aren't familiar, most of you have probably had one, but a Myers-Briggs is a personality test, right, that tells you different things about that person, whether they're introverted, extroverted, etc. And then the TKI assessment is a conflict resolution assessment. So how they tend to deal with conflict, right? And so a couple of things that's really important to understand about that. I am an extrovert, if you couldn't tell, because I don't stop talking ever. I am not happy in the silence, right? So I'm like extremely extroverted. So one of the things that I do as an extrovert is I talk through problems, right? So if I'm with my team and I've got a problem to solve, my conversation, I'm going to literally talk through and ask for input from my team and talk through a problem until I come to a resolution. Or if I signal to the team that I'm okay with whatever the team thinks, they come up with the resolution. That doesn't work for everybody. A lot of people that are introverts, introverts tend to internalize that dialogue, right? And they think about it and think about it and think about it and think about it. And then when they say what they're going to say, that's what they mean. They've already done the mental calculus. Well, I don't work that way. Like my brain just doesn't function that way. So when you're in a position of leadership or as a business owner, it's important to understand that when you're having dialogue with your team and working through problems. And so I had a team lead that was on my team. I was a senior executive at the time. She was very good at what she did. And we had our weekly meetings, and, I had a problem, and I had set some ground rules internally that said, okay, if I say this, that means that I'm going to make the decision, but I want the team to give me their input, right? Or feedback. And then if I say something this way, then I want the team to make the decision. So, the intent is to have your team involved in those conversations that need to, and make sure that they have a voice and they're giving you the information about the things that you're not thinking about, because you don't know what they deal with every day, especially the higher you go. Well, I would bring this team together, and every week we'd have this conversation, and I'd say my trigger words that meant one thing, and if not, then it meant something else. Well, it turns out this one person's experience, that trigger word meant the opposite to her. So it was important to get her input. She was a team lead, but she stopped participating in the conversation. So I called her in her one-on-one. I asked her about it. I was like, what is going on? And she's like, you never listen to what we say. You tell us you can make the decision, right? And then you do the complete opposite, right? And I'm like, okay, like help me understand that, right? And what I didn't understand was I didn't give the guidance up front to let them know that's what I meant. But it was a perfect example how when people, no matter if you're with them every day, it's important to package your message. You can say one thing, you can say one sentence and send it to 5 different people. If they, whatever your language is that's packaging it, that's going to them, they can construe the same message in 5 different ways based on what their experience is. So understanding who you're sending that message to or who you're speaking to, right? Whether it be email, whether it be a voicemail, whether it be whatever, it's important for them to understand, and whether it's a client or whether it's internal, it's important for you to understand them and how they consume messaging, so that you're packaging that message in a way that they're going to interpret it the way that you want them to do. So that's what I mean by packaging your message, is understanding the receiver, right? Thinking about that and making sure that the wrapping, the bow that you're tying on your package, right, matches who you're sending that to. So that's just one example for me. Do you have any examples like that, Alan?
I mean, I think that goes to like just knowing your team, right? I mean, it's like you said, 5 different people that have 5 different personalities. I mean, one thing we do, I mean, this is not necessarily about emails, but it matters in communication is, we started doing DISC assessments for our employees. So when we hire them, we know, are they a D, are they an I, are they S or the C? So when I am writing an email, maybe it's specifically to one employee and then another one, I'm going to use language that I know that caters to them more, that's going to resonate with them more based on their personality type. I know the ones that, I need to push a little bit more with a more sense of urgency versus ones that maybe there needs to be a little bit more sensitivity in the approach. So for me, yeah, I think, knowing that's just knowing your team. And then with your clients too. I mean, as you get to know your clients over the months and the years, I think you start to understand what they're going to respond to best, what communication medium they're going to respond to, what type of, language and how you message it. You're going to start to understand that. You need to apply that, and that will ultimately help the relationship flourish.
So, I'm going to add on this. I sent a message to Brittany. I said, Brittany packages her messages in emoji, right? So it's 100% true. It can be a tool. And the reason I bring this up is it can be a tool to convey intent, right? But it doesn't work with everybody. And I can tell you, the higher you go up in an organization, the more layers there are, and the bigger the organization, it's seen as unprofessional, right? So if you have, which doesn't mean, Brittany, that I'm saying that about you. I'm just saying that in general, in corporate environments where it's large organizations, 500 plus, Fortune 500s, that the expectation that people have for you as a leader is different. The other thing is also knowing your audience. It can help you build a personal rapport with your clients. I tend to try to me, it's about relationships, and business is secondary, right? The business will come from relationships. And so, building relationships and having that sense of friendship or intimacy to be able to have a conversation with an emoji, right? That can be appropriate. But read your audience. Some people, their expectations are you are super professional. Like, I'm coming to you, you've got a COO title. So if I'm talking to you, I have a certain level of expectation. And if you can't deliver on that, then that means that I see you as less knowledgeable or less qualified to provide me with whatever services it is that I'm coming to you for. So understand that. I like to use emojis, or GIF slash GIF, however you choose to say it, as well. So what about you, Alan? Any experiences with speaking emoji?
Not speaking emoji, but you kind of triggered a memory. When my first job out of college, I worked for the Miami Dolphins, and
I'm sorry.
my my bosses, I was in the communications department. Funny enough, we're talking about communication, and my boss's boss was the leader of that division, the vice president of communications for the Dolphins. And the way I would speak with my boss, who was under him, was very kind of like playful, and just, I remember my first day and I called him by his last name. He's like, don't do that. So I got used to that. And then when I started dealing with the vice president of communications, because I had some roles that intersected with his, there was a couple times we were texting, and I even just he would write something to me and I would say, hey. And I remember, never forget, I was like 23 and it scared the crap out of me. He wrote back, don't address me as hey. And from that moment, I was like, whoa. So I started saying, hello, Mr. Blank. And that was how he wanted to be communicated to. So it just, shows you the different roles.
Hold on. Mr. Blank, was that because you were using an expletive, or was you just not putting his name in there?
I could say his name, I guess. His last name was not Blank, obviously, but I was not using a curse word.
You weren't calling him an expletive? That's not what was happening there?
No, I could understand why he wouldn't be happy about that if that was the case. But, no, just the fact that I said hey instead of, I guess, hello, to him came off as, and it was in a text message, which shows you how things can be misconstrued. Because I'm sure if I said hey in person, it probably wouldn't have been as big of a deal, but he felt that was not an appropriate way to address him. So just kind of so it just shows you got to play to the different audiences that you're speaking with.
100%. Okay. So packaging your message, basically know your audience and package it appropriately. If they like reindeer on their package, wrap your message in reindeer
emojis,
paper, right? Or emojis for that matter. They do have animal emojis now. So if they like rhinoceroses, send the smiling rhinoceros as opposed to the rolling on the floor emoji. Wow, we've gotten off topic. But we tend to do that week after week, but that makes it more fun. All right, let's talk about frequency in your messaging, right? In your communication. So let's talk about that in different facets. So if you are communicating with a client, right? How frequently should you follow up with them, Alan?
With a current client?
A current or prospect?
Yeah, I mean, from a current client, I like to keep the communication pretty open. I think you do need to set some boundaries so they don't think that they can just contact you 24/7 when that's not part of the scope of what you're doing with them. But, I have important clients that I speak with once, two, sometimes three times a week, depending on what's going on. If it's changing the budget in their ad spend, or they're adding a new service, or they want to tweak some things. So I think the biggest thing is being proactive, though, with current clients. There are going to be ones that, life goes by, time passes, they're busy, they're not going to reach out to you. So if you're only reach out to them is sending them that monthly report, to me, that's not enough. There needs to be that personal touch, asking them out to lunch here and there, checking in a couple times a month, because you don't want to be perceived as indifferent. And I think when you are just, sending out having that once a month communication that you have to have because it's part of the scope and doing nothing else, I don't think that's good. Obviously, you don't want to go overboard and send them too much, but, I think it depends on the scope of the project and who the client is. But I think I like to keep in touch with my bigger and best clients at least once a week, and my other clients at the minimum once a month. And I try to send quarterly things, whether it's inviting them to events I'm hosting, obviously holidays and stuff like that. And we do a questionnaire in the beginning that's a personalized questionnaire. When's your birthday? How many kids do you have? Things like that, so we can reach out on those. Yeah. And then prospects, that's a touchy one, because the farther and farther you get away from that meeting where you pitch them on the investment and all that, the lesser and less chance they'll sign with you if they haven't already. So I usually follow up 3 times after that one meeting if they haven't signed with me. Like, we're going to have our introductory call. We're going to have our call where we look at their current marketing, and then we're going to have a call to go over, the proposal. If they don't make a decision right then and there, then it's usually 3 times for me. And that's usually all phone. Now, email, I keep them in my ecosystem. If they fall off the face there, if they ghost me, they stay in a sequence that can last up to 3 to 4 months, and it's once every 2 to 4 weeks they're getting some sort of email that's based on their interest. If they were talking to me about SEO services, they're going to get some benefits of SEO emails, and then there'll be one final email that's kind of like, hey, do we have permission to close your file? We haven't heard from you. If you're still interested, here's our Calendly link. But that to me can go on for quite some time. But there's no downside in my mind to keeping them in your ecosystem. But in terms of like calls and texts, I would say 3 is usually my limit.
So have you had any success with people when you say, hey, I'm going to close your file?
I've had a couple of people book calendars or appointments with me one night when they get that email. It says permission to close your file. We haven't heard from you. And I have actually had several people do that, or at least even just responses like, hey, I appreciate the follow-up. This time I no longer need it, but I'm going to keep you in mind. Are they keeping in mind? I don't know, but I'd rather be in their ecosystem. I'd rather be top of mind, because if that need arises again, I'm probably going to be the first person they're thinking about.
Well, I will say this. I do feel like I do want to say this. We're all inundated on LinkedIn and everything else with people trying to sell us stuff, right? Sure. Some of those are automated messaging. Some of them are real. I always try to at least tell someone and be upfront, be like, hey, would love, appreciate to connect with you. I'll keep you in mind if I know of anybody who wants your services. Unfortunately, that's not a fit for me, but I'd still love to stay connected or something similar, right? Do those salespeople that favor. They appreciate that.
I was talking more about like prospects, so like not just like random people on LinkedIn.
No. I get it. This was an aside, right? This was not what you were talking about. I'll address what you were talking about here in a second. But it will literally make their day. And also some of those salespeople, give them feedback. They want to be better. People that I've gone through RFPs with, et cetera, give them that feedback, because they do appreciate it if you're genuine. Because a lot of times people will talk to them and then they just drop off into a void. And we've all experienced it as business owners or leaders, or individual contributors as salespeople, right? People just drop into a void, and that's just, you wouldn't ghost your family or your friends or your girlfriend, not that those people are anything like that, but it's human decency, right? The same reasons you wouldn't do it to them, don't do it to a salesperson, especially if you got a dialogue going. Just my food for thought for the day. That being said, going back to your frequency. So on prospects, I will, if there's someone that you've had conversations with and communicated with, and you're starting to have those conversations, I'll usually check in with them every 3 days or so. That's my general rule of thumb. And it doesn't necessarily have to be about whatever we're talking about, right? But hopefully during the course of that conversation, when you're talking to someone who could potentially do business with you, you are asking enough questions about them that what's at least something that's of interest that you can connect on, whether it's kids, whether it's, hey, I've got this birthday party thing coming up, or I'm going golfing next week, or whatever that is. Utilize that to develop that connection. Don't go for the kill. People want you to care about them. And that's a way to show that, hey, I care enough and I listen enough for you, and it's important enough for me to build a relationship with you that I remembered that and I talked to you about it. People, if you do that too, a lot of times they'll feel obligated to respond to you or give you an update or something, so that they know it's still on their mind. So make sure that, you're not constantly going after folks and basically beating them down. Hey, when can we meet? When can we meet? When can we meet? That's the first person that I'm going to say, nope, moving on from you. Right? Because you're not respecting my time, or that I may have other things going on too. But 3 days is every 3 days is a pretty good cadence for that. As far as existing clients, you want to touch all of your existing clients at least once a month. And as you grow, that becomes harder and harder because you're going to have more clients, right? However, when you have a spare 2 or 3 minutes, those people that you have a good relationship with or are longtime clients from when you started or later on, make sure you're sending them a text message or a LinkedIn message or something, just checking on them. You know what I mean? Hey, how are things going? How are things going with your kid? You know, how was the softball tournament? Blah, blah, blah. Just something like that, right? Because they're people too. And, you know, everything that I do is based around relationships. So one of my taglines for one of my business is relationship-based real estate. Most real estate is transactional, right? That means that once that real estate agent makes that sale, they don't care anymore because they're out of a job for 7 years because the person buys a new house on average every 7 years, right? So they're out of a job and they're having to go find the next one. So building relationships equals loyalty, equity, and trust. And so make sure that you're continuing at least, I would say, once every couple of weeks, just doing a check-in message with someone, you know, whatever it is. And then once a month, you're actually having a conversation with them about their business, right? How are sales going this month? Is there anything I can do for you? You know, what do you have any questions? Can I be a resource for you? You know, anything like that. Because at the end of the day, just like networking, when you're working with other businesses and you're talking to them, you're hoping to learn. Your clients are still people you can network with. They have stuff that they know that they can help you with, and vice versa. So be there, at least offer to be a resource for them. And if you've got a large organization, have your sales teams, your client, client care representatives or whatever you're going to call them.
Client success manager.
Yeah, client success manager, whatever you call them, right? Client success advocate, CSA, whatever your fancy terminology is. It's all about success, right? And making sure that you're driving success, and part of that requires communication. So make sure that you're having that communication with them, because they're not going to tell you when something's wrong. I can tell you that right now. You will find that out when they're out the door. So make sure you're continuing that dialogue. And a good barometer of doing that is continuous conversation, because if the frequency goes down on their end, that tells you something's wrong and you need to dig in. So one thing I wanted to say too about emails is email signatures. So I saw this really cool one that I wanted to share with everyone. And I've seen a lot of emails, and this was the best one that I've seen. So the person signed off with "to your success." So I usually use respectfully because I'm trying to show respect, right? But it said "to your success." So they're basically wishing you success. And I thought that was a super cool way to sign off an email. What did you think, Alan?
Yeah, that's a really cool way. I think that's catchy. People are going to remember that instead of just, I'm typing this from my iPhone, so watch out for typos or sincerely or any of those. So, but going back to your point,
sincerely, really sincere. I mean, really.
Best, and all these other ones, right?
Best regards.
Yeah. I think it just goes back to clients don't want to be treated like another number. They want to know that you care. I mean, like you said, they're human beings, and it's the old adage, people do business with people they know, like, and trust. So if you can bond with a client over your favorite sports team, both having kids at the same age, the college that you went to, I think that matters. I mean, at the end of the day, it's not saying you need to be best friends with your client, but you do want to treat them like a human being and not, just someone you're swiping their credit card.
100%. And if you are actually swiping their credit card, we have another conversation to have. Okay. So I think that's a good way to leave that one off. If anybody in the audience, I see you out there, has any questions or anything, any comments or experiences on there, feel free to share. The next one's going to be fun. Horror stories and what not to say when selling. So, Alan, what is the worst thing someone has said to you when they're trying to sell you something?
I've gotten a few via LinkedIn, emails. you won't regret it. I mean, that's automatically like, okay, I don't even want to even open this email. I've seen, you won't, this is a once in a lifetime opportunity. You won't find a better deal elsewhere. Trust me. Anything like that to me just comes off as suspicious when
you've got trust issues. Is that what I'm hearing? Trust me. You've got trust issues, Alan?
It just, people, I think you try to use this strategy, and there's some credence to like, okay, a sense of urgency and, timing and all that. But when you use phrases like that, I think it's just an automatic, turn off.
Well, that makes sense. The one thing that I will say, and it kind of harkens back to what we talked about before, not just your clients, but also your prospects, make them feel supported and validated, right? Mm-hmm. One, if you go too hard in the paint with a sale, and I've got negative selling examples twice, right, this week from LinkedIn messaging. And I'm going to share one. And I actually wish I had looked up the other one from this week too, because it was another example. Maybe I'll find it. It says, I hadn't responded to this guy's messages because, quite frankly, he was just going hard in the paint sales on everything, and it was clearly automated messaging. And quite frankly, this week, Alan knows I just didn't have the time. So the last message in this guy's chain says, I totally understand if standing out from the competitors isn't your highest priority right now, or maybe you're wanting to try it on your own. I wouldn't advise that. Okay, number one, my response. Hey, Douglas, I'm sure that was an automated drip. Just a word of advice, but this, in the quotes, is a huge turnoff, especially for someone who owns a marketing company. So don't ever use the negative, like, it's one thing to use like negative conversations around competitors, which I don't even recommend that. However, saying something like that to a potential client who's already not responding to you is not going to make me want to respond to you. I'm 100%. Definitely never responding to that dude other than that. And I have half a mind, not only is he getting called out on the show here, I have half a mind to go back to his sales manager or VP of sales or chief revenue officer or whatever it is and send that to him and say, hey, look, as a COO and fellow company owner / driver, is this what represents your company the way that you want it to be represented?
Right.
I mean, seriously, who wants to do business with someone like that? Do not do that kind of thing. Or don't go out. I had one person a while back was talking about something I was doing on YouTube that it's not even out there anymore. And he was basically trying to sell me on YouTube services on, doing SEO on YouTube and all that other stuff. And he comes in and he says, hey, your channel's not performing well, blah, 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 and then list some things out. Your SEO is non-existent. Your blah, 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 blah,
your
blah.
Your website has 10 errors, stuff like that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's negligible, but you're basically saying, hey, dude, and if you're saying that, that's fine, but don't start that conversation with the 10 errors. Again, going back to packaging. Hey, I found 10 opportunities to make your website better, and I'd love to help you do it.
And make you more successful.
Right? That's a different packaging than your website has 10 errors. You need to do business with me. You suck. Or the person that you're working with sucks. Maybe they have a personal relationship with them. You have no idea. But always twist, even if it's a negative thing, turn it to a positive. Turn it to an opportunity. It's just like if you're an entrepreneur. As an entrepreneur, right, you want to lean into the suck. Right? If something goes sideways, lean into it. Remember how we always talk about failing forward. Lean into it and fix it. It's an opportunity. It fails. It didn't work out the way you wanted to. Fine. It's an opportunity. And no matter what you learned, right? You got better from that and you pivoted, which is going to put you on a path to success. Hello, salespeople. and I know I'm on my soapbox a little bit here, but you're never going to get a client if you sit there and tell them they suck, or their product sucks, or their service sucks, or their approach sucks. And also be aware of who you're talking to. If you're sending that to a guy who's in charge of a marketing company, probably not the smartest thing to do.
Right. I think the biggest issue that people have, whether it's in a sales email or a sales call, is they don't make the person they're talking to the hero of the story. When you make it all about what you can do and not about what their life is going to look like, how it's going to be better, I think that's the biggest mistake. I like to, I've done a lot of research on email marketing. I've had some success with it. And I think the reasons people buy are personal gain is obviously, I think, the number one. Logic or research, kind of, based off of logic, social proof, or like that third party influence, and then kind of that fear of missing out or scarcity. And I always like to ask myself a few questions, is like, when I'm sending an email, is why now? Is it new? Is it limited? Is it exclusive? Is it timely? And the biggest thing is, who cares? Who's going to be affected most by this, positively or negatively, by having or not having your product? And then why should they care? What is their life going to look like after they invest with you in a product or service, and making them the hero of that story? And then how can you prove it? Do you have testimonials? Do you have case studies? Do you have other results or stories, clippings about what you've done? And I think that's what it's about for me, is making it about, if you're going to send something out, making that person the hero of the story. Try to talk to that person. It's a lot easier to talk to one person than try to make it for many. And if you can, dial in on what that person's needs are, I think that's the most crucial aspect.
I love that, Alan. I think that's something, guys, for everybody, that's the takeaway there. I love the way you phrase that, right? Make that person the hero of the story. That's huge. Again, it's about positivity. It's about how you can help them drive forward. It's about, not necessarily making them better, but improving their status, right? So you don't want to do anything that seems like it's judging what they're doing today. Now, if during the course of the conversation you say, okay, now you're prepping for a prospect, right? You've had that initial conversation. You're prepping for a prospect. If it's SEO, or if it's, whatever, and I'm using marketing examples, right? You want to go and look at that website and understand, okay, how good of a job are they doing there, right? And sometimes it's also good when you're looking at that stuff and you see other things that are opportunities, right? And you say to them, hey, whoever's doing your SEO is doing a great job. Keep that going. I'd love to help you here in these other areas to help match your efforts here with what you've got going on with your SEO, so you can maximize your marketing dollar, right? It's okay to compliment them on things that they're doing right, because I don't want to sell you something if you're doing it right. If it's performing for you, keep it, because my job is to make sure that you're successful. And if there's something that's already working, I'm not going to sell it to you. I want you to keep doing that, because that combines with all the other things that I'm doing to make you a success, right? So it's okay to tell them something's working well, right? Yep. And if you do, they're also a lot more apt to tell you what things they're not happy with, right? So, okay, or vice versa. A lot of times when people will say, hey, we're not really interested. We've already got someone who does that. Okay, we'll turn the question around. Dude, that's awesome. Help me understand what, we're always constantly looking for better ways, for ways to make ourselves better for our clients. What's working really well for you right now, right? They'll tell you exactly what they're into. And then inevitably at the end of that conversation, or towards the end of that conversation, and where they've listed all the great things, one, they're feeling good about themselves. They're also going to tell you, but we're not so great at this, right? You've disarmed them because you've given them a compliment on what they're doing well. You should celebrate success with them, and then give them the opportunity to get better on the other things that they're looking for. It's psychologically, if you go through and you start attacking people on the front end and you think you're going to sell somebody that way, I have news for you. It's not going to work. I'd love to see the statistics on this guy's drip campaign on how many people fall out of that when they get to that particular email?
Probably a lot.
I'd say probably 90% of them. Now, another way he could have done that is it could say something I do sometimes is I'll tell people, hey, I'm sure you're totally busy. Here are some tools for you to take a look at. Totally understand. Here's some tools for you to look at. And I'm providing value because, again, a way to open doors is to provide value. When you're reaching out via email or you're reaching out with any other attempt to talk to somebody, they're trading something of value to them, to you, in order for that communication to go through. So, for example, their name, email, and phone number is worth about $25 a piece for that bit of information. What are you providing to them in exchange for that information in your communication? Right? So again, think about it from that perspective. Even that, both parties have to get something out of it. But at the end of the day, if you're if you're talking negatively about your client, you're going to lose them. Provide value, find ways to provide value. And, even when you're ending that cycle of reaching out, leave them with something of value because they will come back to you. I usually have, I'd say about 20% of people that get 25% of people, they'll come back and they'll say something like, I am so sorry. It's been crazy with the kids and work and everything else. Right. And then they feel bad. And then they'll start that communication cycle with you. Do not do negative. It's not going to get you anywhere positive. If you do negative, it's not going to get you anywhere positive. Ooh, I like that.
There's a quote.
Take that down, people, if you lasted 56 minutes with us. Okay. So I did have something else, leadership communication, but that is way too big a topic for the time that we have left. So instead, I'm going to pivot a little bit. We're going to try to keep it to an hour this week. I know you want to hear us rant for another 45 minutes like you did last week, but we're going to be wrapping up here soon. So we'll push that to another day. However, I do have some exciting news to share. I met someone who started a LinkedIn group, Tampa LinkedIn group for alumni, Erin. She's a LinkedIn member, of mine, a connection of mine. So check her out. So if you're in the Tampa area, check her group out. Go ahead and add yourself to it. So if you're alumni and you're either a business leader or a business owner, add yourself to that group, or just an alumni in general. We are actually talking about doing a networking event, on-site networking event, which means I'm going to drive my happy self all the way. And Alan, I'm not saying you have to do this, but at least I'm going to drive all the way from Santa Rosa Beach down to Tampa. I am not going to go by the former bombing range that is now a campus. And I'm going to go visit with our friends over in Tampa. So look for alumni groups like that, participate in them. I'm excited about meeting some of you in person. And I'm probably going to grab a GoPro and get some footage, or use my phone and get some footage with everybody there. So I'm excited.
When is that?
For that. We don't have the time or date locked down yet. Josh and myself and Aaron are working on that. So we're hoping, we're hoping to do a bowling type event there, since Josh is super excited about that. So a little bit different, but there'll still be beer and lots of conversations, and you can make fun of my bowling, unlike Brittany, who apparently is a rock star at bowling. So that's happening. I also want to shout out our website, goldenknightsclub.com. We had 2 new people in the last week or so that signed up for the Golden Knights Club.com marketplace. Alumni marketplace is what I'm going to start calling it, where 2 folks are on there. They've put out what they're looking for and what services they offer. So make sure you take advantage of that. Sign up for it. Again, it's completely free and it's made for your benefit. And, utilize the website. It's there for you. So, all right, 59 minutes left other than football talk. We're still working on the podcast, folks, so be on the lookout for that. Alan, any closing thoughts on anything that we talked about tonight?
No, I think it was a really good discussion. I mean, communication is so crucial in so many different areas of business and in life. So, just take away that, the cadence of how you communicate, the frequency, and the way that you do it can really make or break, getting new prospects and retaining current clients as well as team members and attracting new ones.
Awesome. All right. I didn't say it all episode, so I'm going to say it now. Alan Levin, Smarty Pants with a Z.
Z.
Oh, you're going to start making a buzzing noise too. I like it. So can you tell people how they can find you?
Well, of course, you can find me on goldennightsclub.com, but you could also find me at LinkedIn, Alan Levin, or my website, smartypants with a Z, marketing.com, or email me at Allen, ALLEN, at smartypantsmarketing.com.
Awesome. Yeah. In addition to that, you can go to goldennightsclub at club.com, find Alan's LinkedIn, and click through from the site to get to his LinkedIn. So you still only have to go to one place if you want to. However you want to go to two, feel free. All right. Well, that wraps up the episode. I'll talk about how you can reach me real quick. So for all of your marketing needs in small business, legal, medical, higher education, and anything else, video needs that you may have for production, you can reach me at r.phipps at 7lights-agency.com, or visit our website, 7lightsagency.com. And for any of your consulting needs, you can reach me at bossleadershipsolutions@gmail.com. And if you want to talk to any of us on the show, we've got an email as well. It's ubtlive@gmail.com. So that'll wrap up episode number 13 for us this week. Be on the lookout for the sports podcast. We appreciate all of you tuning in. And we do have an extra special guest coming, a UCF alum who is also a politician. So over the next few weeks, look out for that. That's super exciting. As a state representative that is UCF supportive, will be joining us and is also very supportive of the small business community and what we're doing. So tune in for that. Keep an eye out for that. We really appreciate the folks that come on. And other than that, have a wonderful week. And remember to like, grind, and subscribe. Go Knights!
Go Knights, charge on.